Okay, so in the last video, we added collisions. So by default, cubes have colliders. We added a collider to the camera, and so now the camera will collide with the door and stop because the door is closed. Now what we're going to look at is being able to have additional interactions with objects. So you're going to be able to click on the door and open it. When the door opens, you can either have it just open on its own, like it opens 100%, or you have it like rotate out, okay? The problem with rotating the door in either case is that when you're using these primitives, these cubes and orbs that are built into Unity, there's no way to modify what's known as the pivot point. So when you click on an object and you rotate it, see how it's rotating like that? Well, a door wouldn't rotate like that. Maybe if it's like a hidden door or something. But as far as a regular door in a house, would not open like that. It would open along the side because it's on a hinge. So, unless you download a third-party script which mods or modifies the Unity UI itself, the user interface, so unless you do that, there's no way to manually change that pivot point. And so this door would open wrong. Now, having said that, more than likely you're going to commission someone to make a door in a third-party program, 3D Max or whatever, and you're going to tell them to put the pivot along the side. But if for some reason you're stuck using primitives in Unity, I'm going to show you a workaround. It's not pretty, but it's pretty easy. So as long as you understand that what's going on is the problem is the pivot point is in the center, whereas the pivot point really should be along the edge because the door is attached by hinges and it's really pivoting on the hinge, not pivoting on the center. Okay? There are times that you would want it to pivot towards the center. Maybe like if it's a turret or some kind. You don't want it to pivot on the edge, you want to pivot more towards the middle. Anyways, so the way you change the pivot is you're going to actually attach another object to this one. So the door is actually going to become a child to another object. That object is going to be off to the side, and that object is what will have the, that's what will be used as the pivot point. So again, you're not going to have to do this if you are having someone else or even yourself, if you are designing the models in a 3D modeler, you're not going to worry about this because you can set the pivot point in the modeler. But in Unity itself, if you're using these primitives, you're going to need this. Or as I said, download one of those mods that changes Unity itself. But I don't want to get into that because that in itself is an entire series about the different ways you can modify Unity. So let's just do create 3D object. We'll do a cube, but we're going to make a few changes to this cube. So first of all, it needs to be in the right position. So the cube needs to be, let's zoom in. So just like the hinge, you would expect the cube to be right around here. We might have to try this a couple times. I might skip ahead if it takes more than 1 or 2 tries. So effectively, you're adding a hinge. Okay, so the door needs to be attached to the cube, but we don't want anyone to see the cube. So with that cube, just remove the cube mesh filter. Cast shadows shut to off, and it should not receive shadows. Actually, let's just remove the mesh renderer itself. It should keep its 3D box collider, which is really all that matters. So either way, we could have just created an empty object and added a box collider. Either way. So let's go ahead and now, so we've created the cube. It's not visible. The door is a child to the cube. Now that cube needs to rotate. So we're going to just quickly add a script that does the rotation, but then we'll make it conditional because we don't want it to rotate until you click on it. So we'll call this open door. But it doesn't go on the door, it goes on the cube itself. So like I said, this is a little counterintuitive, but you're not going to have to do this if you're not using these built-in primitives. All right, so let's go ahead, go into that script, and what we're going to do is just the simple rotate command. We don't want it to rotate at the beginning in the final version of the game, but this is just for demonstrative purposes. So transform, you can either use Euler angles or you can do rotate, since it only is going to run once. In this case, it will give you basically the same result. Actually, let's take a look at, right, because the rotation 0, 0, 0, right? So yes, you could use Euler angles. So we want this to rotate, let's say 45 degrees on the y-axis, because it's the vertical axis that it's pivoting on, like a pole. So let's run it. And there you go. The door is opening basically correctly. There's a little bit of a gap there, but don't forget we would add a frame eventually. All right, so far so good. We've got the door opening. Now we have to make it conditional. So that means you click on the door. So that's going to be new functionality that we haven't added yet. You click on the door and it will open. So we need to add another script. And we might use this for a bunch of objects, so we'll call this check for click. So we might be looking for mouse clicks on a bunch of objects. So we're going to click on the door itself, put check for click, open that up, outside of start, outside of update, on, void on mouse down. Does just what it says. It's looking for a click of the mouse on this object. Now this is automatically checking for a click, so you don't even have to do if. You can just say, you've already said, okay, if the mouse has been clicked on this object, what do we do? Well, if you were using a 3D model where you could modify the pivot point, you could just say, all right, rotate. But like I said, we kind of have to do this a little in a clumsy kind of way, so you have to transfer information to the pivot. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable. Since it has to be used between objects, it's going to have to be a global variable. Excuse me, a static. I said global, I meant static. We haven't used any statics yet, so let's put one in here. Public static string open door. And it starts off as no. Okay, so this, by saying static, it means that this variable will be accessible anywhere to any object, to any script. These are not. These are accessible to precisely the object that the script is attached to. This will be accessible to any object, any script. And you'll see in just a moment. So what we do is we come here to check for click, and we take that new variable. So it's in walkabout dot it was what's it, open door? Yeah, open door, and we're going to change that to Y for yes. So we created the variable. The script that's attached to the door changes it to yes. And now we're going to take this out of here, put it into here, but we're going to put it into an if statement. So if, again, we have to say where that variable is coming from. Walkabout dot open door equals, and it's a double equal sign, sorry, equals Y. Then you want to transform dot rotate. Now we can either change this to a Euler angle, or we can, because since this keeps rotating over and over again every time this is true and it increases that rotation, we don't want this thing spinning around. So we would need to change this variable back to no. That way it doesn't keep doing it. Or like I said, well, you want to change it to no anyways, but you could just use getComponent.Euler angles Either way. But it is good to know the difference between what rotate does and what Euler angles does. Again, this is a change to its current position. Euler angles ignores the current position, and from a default position of 0, 0, 0 will alter it to the position that you have declared. Okay, so we created the variable. You click on the door to change that variable, and then this will rotate the object as well as any children attached to it. So let's just make sure that open door is now attached to the cube. So we go to cube. Open door is attached to it, so this should work. So the door is closed by default. I click on it, and it opens. So there you go. Now, like I said, this is a little bit messier than what you're going to have to do. Normally, like I said, you're going to have a 3D modeler that's going to let you assign where the pivot is. But if you have to use these for some reason, now you know a way around it, because effectively you've created an object that's the hinge. So it's a little bit messy. Maybe later on I will show you an example where you don't have to transfer information, because if you don't need the hinge, then you can just have the rotate command right on the door itself. So that should do it for this video. So again, sorry that this is kind of messy, but if you get your head around this, it really does help with as far as how to make an object mouse clickable and how to get around some of the limitations of the system. That if something doesn't work the way you'd expect it to work, you need to innovate, and you need to come up with an alternative. So that should do it for this video.